everyone.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us, and I'm sorry for the little delay, but we're so happy to have you all. For those of you that don't know me, I see a lot of familiar faces, but for anybody that doesn't know me, I am Julie Savage, the Grassroots Leadership Manager at Great Old Broads for Wilderness, and I'm going to introduce our lovely speakers in a moment. But if you are new to Great Old Broads, we are a 36-year-old women's-led grassroots organization based in Colorado. We currently have 5 staff members, including our brand new executive director, Reba Elliott, who started yesterday. So that's very exciting. You all should have received that news. Woohoo! And thank you all. I see a lot of faces that were involved in making that happen. So thank you. And we have about 40 broadbands or volunteer chapters across the country. And I see many of you, our broadband leaders, are represented here as well. And we're all here for the Roadless Rule, which is under attack at the moment. And we have Len Montgomery, who is our Great Outdoors Campaign Director for Environment America. And I heard her yesterday say she's a wrangler of the Save the Roadless Forest Coalition or the Roadless Events Coalition, but she is one of the wonderful leads, and we very much appreciate all she's been doing in this process. And then we have Chandra LeGue, which many of you should be familiar with. Chandra is our co-leader for Willamette Valley Broadband in Oregon. She also participates in several of our advocacy coalitions. And when she's not doing broad stuff, she's the senior conservation advocate at Oregon Wild. So we're happy to have both of them here. And I also know a couple of our members are going to be sharing some of their precious roadless areas with you as well. And without further ado, I'll send it on over to Len and Chandra.
Awesome, thanks. And just making sure that you can see the slide. All right, cool. I'll move on to yours, Len.
Excellent. So yes, and really great to see so many familiar faces on this Zoom. So as Julie said, I'm Len Montgomery. I'm the Great Outdoors Campaign Director for Environment America. We're a national environmental group that works to protect the natural world, and I manage all of our public lands and forests protection work all across the country, which includes doing a lot of work to protect national forests. And I actually got my start as a college student volunteer in the late 90s, working to build support for the original Roadless Rule and helping to collect paper public comments, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a sec. And so let's move to the next slide. I want to start big picture before we start talking about defending the Roadless Rule. Why would you want to ban roads and forests in the first place? So I think to many of you, this might seem obvious, but there's a couple values that having roadless forests are important for. So the first are environmental. So wildlife habitat is probably I don't know if it's the most important. It's one of the easiest to explain. Roads fragment habitat. There are a lot of critters that don't like to cross them, some of them that won't cross them, and having fragmented habitat is really bad for wildlife of all shapes and sizes. Breaking up their populations is really problematic to the health of the populations and the sustainability of those species. And so having large unfragmented swaths of land, whether they're forests or anything else, is actually, probably one of the best things that we can do to help combat the biodiversity crisis and protect other species. Second is clean water. Millions of Americans get their drinking water filtered through national forests, and the roads introduce a number of things that can actually harm some of that filtration activity, including the pollution that is involved with the road building, and then pollution that comes off of vehicles that are going down the roads. And then roads also can lead to erosion, potentially, landslides, mudslides, that sort of thing, which and there we could probably do an entire webinar just about water filtration in forests. So I'll stop there. And then pollution and runoff from vehicles and roads. So, regardless of clean water, we just know that, trucks and, whether they're industrial or, recreational, things run off and fall off of cars and trucks that shouldn't be out in the wild and create pollution. Other reasons too that we're not huge fans of hundreds of thousands of miles of roads in our national forests. Human-caused ignitions of wildfires. So statistically, human-caused wildfires are much, much, much more likely to happen near roads. This makes a lot of sense. How do humans get into the forests? Via roads. And so if they're going to cause a wildfire, it's likely to be near a road. There's also a huge maintenance backlog. The Forest Service has billions of dollars of backlog maintenance that they need to do on their existing roads. This was the case in the late 90s. It's the case now. So from a taxpayer perspective, what are we doing building more roads that we can't afford to maintain? And then finally, to protect recreation. So roadless areas are used by people for, hunting and fishing and camping and hiking and climbing, and more roads crisscrossing through those areas would open up, would fragment that habitat. And actually, I'm realizing I didn't put this on the slide. The other big reason to ban, so that's just the roads argument. The other big reason, though, to ban roads is then you can't do industrial logging or mining or drilling, which is probably actually the most important thing. So starting with why ban roads and forests, but then looking at the all of the other activities that therefore prohibits. So we can go to the next slide. So a little bit of background. I'm going to zip through this fairly quickly, but many of you are from the Pacific Northwest and are familiar somewhat with the timber wars from the 1980s. If not, there's a great podcast from Oregon Public Media that goes through the history of that. But I think the thing to know is that in the 80s, the conflict between environmental groups and forest watch groups and the logging industry and the timber industry had really come to a head. And when President Clinton was elected, it was pretty clear that the situation could not continue. So timber companies could not be allowed to, continue to cut down critical habitat and old growth forests, and and environmentalists couldn't continue to as some were doing, sabotage equipment and and sit in trees. The whole, there was major conflict, and so I'm going to zip very quickly through. But the Clinton administration did a bunch of looking at what was going on in our national forests, a lot of stakeholder conversations, developed the Northwest Forest Plan, but then as they were sort of looking at things through a conservation eye, did an analysis, looked at all of the roads, realized there were hundreds of thousands of roads crisscrossing through the national forest, that there was that huge backlog. And so in 1998, they announced a moratorium on new road building in our national forests to give them a chance to figure out what the heck to do about it. They started a rulemaking process, and 1.6 million public comments were delivered during that rulemaking process through the late 90s and into 2000. And all of those comments were on paper. No digital, no email. It was all paper. That was the first campaign I worked on, was collecting postcards. And ultimately, with 1 million people supporting, and elected officials and voices from all across the spectrum, and the, pretty compelling arguments, the Roadless Area Conservation Rule was published in the Federal Register on January 12th, 2001. Okay, so the next slide, I'm going to try to zip through this a little bit too. Or no, sorry. So the roadless rule is a rule. This is just a super quick primer, and I'm not a lawyer, but just to be clear about the difference between a rule and a law, which will help you understand how we got here. Congress passes and the president signs laws. Rules are made by the executive branch through what's called a rulemaking process, and they're created to implement laws. Both have the force of law, so they have to be followed. And Congress can pass new laws or repeal laws. The executive branch can use a new rulemaking process to revoke rules, or in some cases, just create new rules that supersede old ones. So the roadless rule is a rule, not a law, it's a rule. Okay, so next. What does the roadless rule do? So it does what it sounds like. No new roads or road reconstruction, no commercial logging, and then by extension, no mines or drilling. This is particularly important given the current political situation. There are exceptions for emergencies, including fighting fire, and it protects habitat, it protects clean water, and it sets aside recreation sites, which was that last thing was maybe not the original intent, but we've seen over 24 years that some of the most beloved recreation sites are in roadless areas because they've been protected. And then I think it's important to note that a roadless area is not a wilderness area, which is a different designation. So mountain bikes are allowed. These are just a couple examples, but mountain bikes are allowed in roadless areas on trails. ATVs or off-road vehicles in places where there were existing tracks, campsites with, some semi-permanent buildings and that sort of thing could be, or semi-permanent campsites could be allowed. None of that's allowed in wilderness. Those are allowed in roadless areas. Okay, so now we can go to the next slide. So what happened after 2001? I'm not going to read all of this, but basically, as people may remember, George W. Bush was elected and among other things, delayed and then tried to roll back the roadless rule. The upshot of this is that eventually they were unsuccessful. And in fact, it took about 12 years, but there was finally a ruling that there were no further challenges allowed. The statute of limitation had run out. The roadless rule did apply. But during that period, in the lots of legal activity situation, there was a time period where the administration invited states to petition for their own versions of the roadless rule. Most or a bunch of states just petitioned to say, hey, just protect the roadless areas, quit screwing around. But Idaho and Colorado did petition and successfully get their own rules enacted. And these are federal rules, but they only apply to the forests in those states. And both are a little more, well, they're both more permissive of industrial activity than the 2001 roadless rule is, but those are both separate rules on the books. Okay, so then next slide. Oh, wait, no, actually, yes, next slide, I think we go we go on. So that was I'll be back to talk about what's happening now a little bit later, but that should give you, that gets you at least up to 2013.
Awesome. Yeah, so before we launch into like sort of where we are right now, again, I'm Chandra LeGue. I'm with Oregon Wild, and I'm a broadband leader co-leader in the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and participate in other broads advocacy committees. But I wanted to ground us a little bit in some of the actual places that we're talking about. And this webinar came about with Pacific Northwest Broads at the helm. And so it is Pacific Northwest focused, and I am particularly Oregon focused. But we've tried, so if you're in another region, just know that you can find special places near you too, and places that you know. But we're going to give some examples from areas that we in the Pacific Northwest know. I want to call your attention to this, to a couple of interactive maps that have been developed by partner organizations around the country, that you can use to find areas. And I'm gonna click on, I'm actually gonna go to this one and hope that did this transition to another map. All right, good. I'm just gonna show you real quick, hopefully real quick if it loads. How to use this map when you click through. This is the Wilderness Society map, and I'll go back and we'll make sure to share these links, obviously. But this map shows, and you can see, I'm just using my mouse to scroll in here, but you can also use the zoom in and out buttons. But this shows areas that are currently protected, either as wilderness or national parks in the darkest color of green. The national forests are just this kind of like light color of green. And then roadless areas that were inventoried and included in the 2001 Roadless Rule are the sort of brown color. So just to zoom in here, I live in Eugene, Oregon, and here's the Cascade Mountains, and this is this big wilderness area. In dark green is the Three Sisters Wilderness. And if I want to zoom in on this roadless area on the tip of the Three Sisters Wilderness, I can do that and, like look at the boundaries, and the further you zoom in, the more you can see. So that's just a way. And then the other thing that's cool about this particular tool is that it has a little scroll bar, so you can actually wipe away the roadless areas and see kind of, how much more they add to the wild spaces that we already have protected. So here, where we have protected wilderness, if you add back in the roadless areas, you see that they're pretty extensive additions to many protected areas like wilderness areas that we already have, which makes them incredibly valuable for some of these reasons Len already went over. So I'm going to go back to, so I just wanted to show you that and know that that's a tool that folks can use. There's also another map that's a little bit different from the Outdoor Alliance. And again, we'll make sure these links come to you. So you can find places near you all across the country. So here in the Pacific Northwest, just sort of running by again, like why these places are so important and how they connect to Broads. These are places that many of us love to go to camp and hike and boat and do stewardship projects and advocate for. So they're very connected to the things that Broads was founded around and what we love to do. In the Pacific Northwest, many roadless areas include mature and old growth forests that are vital for our climate and all these other important things you all have been hearing about for the last several years. If you weren't already tuned into that, these areas protect drinking water for millions and millions of people in our region, provide critical habitat for endangered species, including salmon, spotted owls, marbled murrelets, lynx, martin, fisher, all these sorts of critters that depend on these wild places. And then, of course, as Len mentioned, they're important for recreation and the economic benefits that come with that. Here in Oregon, and this is a different interactive map that Oregon Wild has built, there's about 2 million acres of inventoried roadless areas. And again, many of those are adjacent to existing wilderness, but many are standalone spots that we love to get out and enjoy. And I'm going to highlight a few as we go through this and bring in a few other voices too. So just so you can see where some of the places are, I'm going to highlight, I put stars over. And one is here in my backyard, Hardesty Mountain. It's a little over 6,000 acres right outside of Eugene, on the edge of Bureau of Land Management lands. So it's surrounded by roads and clear cuts and provides drinking water, amazing wildlife habitat, great views, amazing forests. And so it's one of the places that I in particular love to visit a few times a year. It's only half an hour to an hour drive outside of a major population center. So that makes it pretty unique too. Another one is the Echo Mountain Roadless area, and this is one that's really important to the Willamette Valley Broadband. We have had numerous campouts at Lost Prairie for those on here and who have been there, and have been on hikes to Iron Mountain, Crescent Mountain, and Echo Basin that are all included in this roadless area. That's well known for its wildflower display and biodiversity. And so there's a couple of broads enjoying some particularly large Alaska yellow cedars. In Central Oregon, Tumalo Mountain is one that I know that the Bitterbrush broads and bros know and love. It's where Tumalo Falls comes over a ridge. Bridge Creek has an amazing trail and provides drinking water for the city of Bend. And Tumalo Mountain is also just a place that you see every time you drive to Mount Bachelor to go skiing, or to one of the Cascade Lakes to go paddling. So it's a pretty important and very large 14,000 acre area just outside of Bend. Mickey, I don't know if you are on and available to unmute, but Mickey's one of the leaders of the Cascade Volcanoes broadband in the Portland, Vancouver area. And I wanted to throw up this map showing Portland, Vancouver over here on the left of this map, and some of the roadless areas in Southeast Washington and the Mount Hood area. Mickey, are you on there?
Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
I don't know if you're prepared to talk about any particular place, but I have a picture of Tamanoas Falls on here, which falls within a roadless area.
Yes, and so we worked with the Oregon delegation. I think it was almost 10 years ago that we started to protect a whole group of these areas around Mount Hood, and failed after a number of years. And we actually went out to trailheads and collected signatures, and we went into Hood River and collected business support for this proposal, this wilderness bill. And so those were areas that we spent, the Salmon River, spent a lot of time on, a lot of effort, and we're very disappointed that we lost them. We thought, we'll have another go at it at some point. But obviously, if this rule goes away, we risk all those areas being lost and no longer eligible for wilderness. So yeah, it's really an important area for us.
Thank you. And then Suzanne, if you're on, I didn't have a photo to share, but I have a map of some of the roadless areas in Washington state. I know that Deborah's on here too. Deborah's one of the leaders of is the leader of the Salish Sea broadband, and mentioned to me that she's concerned about some of the roadless areas around Olympic National Park. I know a bunch of people were just on the Elwha Broadwalk on the north side of the Olympic National Park, and you can see that there are some roadless areas adjacent to the national park that could lose protections. But Suzanne, if you're here, you might want to talk about some places that you know in the rest of Washington.
Yeah, hi Chandra, I'm here. Any chance that I could share my screen and I'll show just a couple of pictures? Or is that too complicated?
Julie will make that happen, and I will stop sharing so that can happen.
I just made you co-host, Suzanne, so you should be able to share.
Okay, let's give this a try. And let's see if that works.
We can see your screen. You just need to make it into a bigger picture.
How's that working?
Great.
Okay, good. So, hey everybody, thanks for being here, and thanks for giving me a few minutes to speak about some of the places that are really important to me in the Okanagan-Wenatchee Forest in Washington. I'm retired from the Forest Service about 1.5 years ago, and am really deeply familiar with many of these places, not only for my own personal enjoyment, but because of my former work with the National Forest. So I am deeply concerned about the repeal of the Roadless Rule, and I'm going to provide a few of the examples of inventoried roadless areas on the Okanagan-Wenatchee. These areas are currently protected, but will be at risk of development if the rule's repealed. These are just a sampling of the few areas. There are many more that share these qualities and that are equally important to maintain under the protection of the Roadless Rule. So Common features to each of these areas that I'm going to highlight are that first, they are adjacent to designated wilderness areas. Each of the roadless areas provide an unofficial buffer to protect wilderness from impacts originating from activities outside but adjacent to wilderness that spill over. So those are things such as noise pollution, habitat destruction and fragmentation, and opportunities for solitude inside wilderness. Next, these areas also provide critical wildlife habitat for both common and endangered species that need room to roam in and outside of wilderness areas to adjacent landscapes. This is especially true for species that have home ranges that extend beyond the wilderness boundaries or that occupy habitat that are on the edge of wilderness. Next, these roadless areas provide recreational opportunities for a wide variety of activities and was already mentioned, including types of uses that are prohibited in designated wilderness. And by doing so, serving this function, they offer places for people to go that are outside of wilderness. This really helps reduce the impact of high levels of recreational use and disperses people across the landscape. The Okanagan-Wenatchee is an urban proximate forest due to it being only a few hours drive from the Seattle metro area. The value of these roadless areas is especially critical here on the Okanagan-Wenatchee due to the population pressure and very high use that occurs. Next one I'm going to finish with is something that I think is often overlooked, that roadless areas are critically important for preserving scenic values and viewsheds. Scenery management is required by multiple laws, and the Forest Service is mandated to protect scenic views and treat scenery as an integrated part of forest management equivalent to other resources. Roadless areas are reservoirs of scenic quality that contribute to the incredible iconic viewsheds that are part of the National Forest System lands, not only across the Okanagan-Wenatchee, but across many other varied landscapes across the entire system. So this picture that I'm showing is a great example of that scenic value. So this is the North Cascades National Scenic Highway that runs through the Methow Valley Ranger District on the northern edge of the Okanagan-Wenatchee. While the road passes through the middle of the corridor, the lands on either side of that highway are designated roadless areas. And the amazing scenic value of this corridor can't be, adequately described. And if these roadless areas are allowed to be developed, that beautiful imagery of the scenic value will be changed significantly. Let's see if I can, right on. So heading south, this is a shot of the Eniat River Valley. In the Eniat, as can be seen in the background of this slide, there's Glacier Peak Wilderness, which are the high rocky peaks that are surrounding Glacier Peak, which is one of Washington's volcanoes. Much of this valley has been burned by fire in the last 20 years, and most of the wilderness portion of the valley. The middle section of the watershed is mostly inventoried roadless areas that are adjacent to wilderness, but have not burned. So they're providing critical habitat for wildlife that are living in the valley while the burned areas inside and outside of wilderness are recovering. This one is a shot up the Icicle River Valley, which also includes roadless areas on either side of a highway that runs, it's a road that runs up the valley. This corridor is adjacent to the extremely high use enchantments area, the Alpine Lakes Wilderness. The inventoried roadless area up the Icicle, they provide abundant, outstanding recreational opportunities that take some of the intense recreational pressure off of the wilderness and off of the enchantments. And this last one, this is the Teanaway River landscape. This shows in the foreground forested areas that are part of the Washington State Department of Natural Resources Teanaway Community Forest. This connects to the inventoried roadless areas that are in the middle of the drainage, the North Fork of the Teanaway River, which then connect to the Alpine Lakes Wilderness at the headwaters of the drainage. And those are the rockiest peaks that you see in the background. This shows the importance of, at a landscape scale, of the connections between wildlands that have been managed to complement their ecological values for the health of the forest and the river. There's been tremendous investment in the past decade or more in restoring salmon habitat in the rivers of the Teanaway. Repealing the Roadless Rule and allowing development in the Forest Service portion in the middle of the Teanaway drainage will sever those connections that have been carefully developed between the Forest Service, the state of Washington, and local communities to manage this highly valuable and interconnected valley for multiple conservation objectives. Wow, that was a lot and I went really quick, but thanks for listening to that. That's all I've got.
That was amazing, Suzanne. What a great examples.
I will try to stop sharing unless somebody else can cut me off. There we go.
I will go back to sharing my screen, I think. Okay. Okay. Wonderful visit to Washington. Now I want to spend more time there. All right. And then if Lauren is here from Alaska.
I'm here, yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. This is just my generic slide that I made for highlighting the Tongass, but if you wanted to say a few words about how important this region is.
Thank you, Chandra, for having that slide, because I'm kind of a Luddite and I have no idea how to share things, and I forgot to send pictures. So it's in the middle of my busy season. I want to thank you for putting this on, and say, Suzanne, my whole family lives in the Methow Valley and has for a long time. And in fact, 2 of my siblings are camped up in the roadless areas right this second, without tents or stoves. They're cowboy camping. But I wanted to say that the Tongass National Forest has been a little different than the rest, in that in 2003, in regards, after much pressure and lawsuits from the Alaska people and are very strong, unfortunately, Alaska legislators, the Tongass was exempted from the Roadless Rule. And as you can see on the map that Chandra very nicely put up there, there's a lot of ground. About 9.37 million acres of land are inventoried roadless areas in the Tongass. The Tongass and some adjacent areas in Canada is the largest intact tract of coastal temperate rainforest on Earth. And it is nationally and globally significant for its ability for carbon sequestration and to help our climate, maybe, and is seen as a critical resource to maintain intact but in our changing climate. Most people don't realize quite how big it is, or that we have such a large rainforest in America, but it is the largest intact one in the world. Also, it's home, of course, to 300 species of mammals and birds and all the other things that the roadless areas throughout America contain. In 2003, it was exempt from the roadless area rule. And this is a battle that, if you've seen the way the roadless rule itself has been battled back and forth, it's incredible. You can hardly keep up with it. And the Alaska has been even more than that because of these exemptions. Finally, there was a number of lawsuits, and in, I believe it was 2009, it was temporarily the exemption was temporarily suspended. So it was back to a roadless rule. It was finally settled in 2011, and then again in 2013, where the same court reversed itself 3 times, but ended up saying, okay, yes, the Tongass is no longer exempt from the roadless rule. And then, of course, we got President number 45 in there who pulled it away from the roadless rule. It was put back in on a lawsuit. And thank you very much to President Obama for working very hard on getting these all back to the roadless area, but is now in danger again. Besides being the largest temperate or intact old growth temperate rainforest in the world, it's very significant, as many roadless areas are, to a number of tribes for hunting, for fishing. It's almost all considered their historic cultural area for the Tlingit and Haida, the Tsimshian, and the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian, mostly peoples, I guess. In 2021, they agreed to work with these tribes, and 6 tribes joined them, but then backed out because they felt that they were not being properly considered at all. They petitioned and they were reconsidered And actually, that was one of the better workings we've ever done through our national government and the tribes. And in 2021, they held a consultation with 10 different tribes, and these tribes expressed 100% desire to quickly go back to having a roadless area, this roadless area in the Tongass. Their excuses for logging have not held up because logging has dropped from, I don't know, 200 jobs down to 62 jobs in 2003 when it wasn't a roadless area. And this is mostly because it is so far in the middle of nowhere that it's very difficult and very expensive to log. It costs more to build roads there than they get from the logging, which is not true just of the Tongass. It's true in a lot of the Northwest area. And in actuality, 47% of the economy and jobs in Southeast Alaska come from tourism and fishing, which are both supported by the Roadless Rule. I think that's about all I have, but I wanted to stress that this is very significant because of the fact that it is the largest intact temperate rainforest in the world, and the carbon sequestration in this area is vitally important to all of the world for that reason. Thanks, Chandra.
Yeah, wow, thank you, Lauren. And yeah, you know, the climate issue is definitely one that I don't think was considered in 2001, you know, when this rule was put in place. But if we were under a scientific regime, it might be considered now, such as with the mature and old growth efforts that we've all been a part of. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to turn it over now to Marina Ritchie, who's a member of the Bitterbrush Broadband in Central Oregon and also a longtime resident of Montana, of Missoula, Montana. So Marina, if you're here,
I am.
we have a few slides to share of a few more places.
Yes, thank you, Chandra. And we have Lookout Mountain, which is from Bend. It's just to the east in the Ochoco Mountains, about an hour or so. It's the highest peak in the Ochocos. It's 7,000 feet, 20,000 acres. Oh, I see you got 14. If you add the uninventoried, it's a little bigger. But I've hiked there many times with different groups, Sierra Club as well as the Broads and Oregon Wild, and it's gorgeous. As you can see, there's just a variety of habitats when you climb up these beautiful trails that take you through. On the north side, there's like lush, dense fir and very wet areas and meadows, and then you're on the south side, these big ponderosas, and you're making your way up and through aspens and wildflowers. And as a birder, I've seen some pretty amazing three-toed woodpeckers and black-throated gray warblers and some incredible things that are all up there. And you eventually get up into this gorgeous ridge. You can see a bit of the top of it, and then you're up at where there was an old lookout. And so it's a very popular area in this area destination. Key place. Oregon Wild has worked in the past to protect it as part of a proposal for a national recreation area in this place. And it was something we tried really hard to get into the 1984 wilderness bill. So beautiful, beloved place here. And then I'm also on the board of the Greater Hells Canyon Council. I used to live in La Grande before, right after Montana, and spent a lot of time there as well. So I wanted to mention that the Blue Mountains, you can see on this map, and I'm giving credit here to David Mildrexler with Eastern Oregon Legacy Fund for these slides that I'm showing right here. And people don't realize that circled black area has the largest ecoregion in Oregon and is this key connector. And what makes it a key connector between these two ecosystems, the Cascades and the Rockies, has to do a lot with the roadless areas. And so the next slide.
Oh, sorry, I might have screwed up your slides. Sorry.
That's okay. That's fine. It doesn't really matter. You want to do the one before? It's all part of the area. So yeah, I didn't know, Chandra, if you wanted to talk about this one, or should I just keep going?
Well, I just wanted, just as an example, one of the big roadless, actually a big roadless complex, and actually I'll go back and kind of circle where it is. It's kind of in this area, right up in the corner of Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, but Joseph Canyon is a major tributary to the Grand Ronde River and homeland to the Nez Perce tribe, and absolutely gorgeous. But it's one of the really large roadless areas in this Northeast Oregon region. And I'll let you, I have this one, Marina, and then I have this one. So
Yeah. Okay, I put this Grand Ronde River roadless area, and it's really an interesting thing, this Looking Glass Creek that comes through it, not only that enters it, not only is it a really important connector between wilderness areas out there, but there's some really interesting things about water. And so the Grand Ronde River goes through La Grande, and it kind of gets hot and urbanized and impacted. But then when it goes through the area where the tributary Looking Glass Creek comes in through this Grand Ronde River roadless area, it actually cools the river by 2 degrees, which is pretty amazing, you know, really, when you think about the ability of these roadless areas to actually renew and heal some of the areas. So I wanted to mention that. And then next one. Over in, you know, people think of Eastern Oregon as being dry, and the Northeast Oregon over in the Wallowas, it has some incredibly west side feeling forests that, you know, have beautiful big trees. And this is the Huckleberry Mountain roadless area. It's adjacent to the Eagle Cap Wilderness on the north side. Okay. I think there's one more. Oh yeah. Then I'm switching to Montana. Okay, so I did live there for quite a long time. And I guess I remember I decided to mention, well, for one thing, Montana has more than 6 million acres of roadless area, so it makes it the 3rd largest in the country for millions of acres of roadless land. So very, very critical places throughout. And you know, and there's many you could mention, but I brought up the Badger 2 medicine first, and that is down on the lower left there. It's been a beloved area by the Glacier National Park and really important to the Blackfeet people, sacred area. And I was involved back in the day in the 80s and 90s when we were big rallies because of all the oil and gas they wanted to get out of there. And there's just been people fighting to save this place successfully for so long. I wanted to bring that up and also mention how many, you know, this is grizzly bear country and, you know, big, wild, vast ecosystems critical to protect. And then the Selway Bedroom, which there's just a little picture up there of a roadless area, that is kind of close to where I lived in Missoula. And so I wanted to bring that up. There's a lot of roadless areas on both sides of that. You know, people forget it. And it's a little bit like Suzanne was saying with the Washington areas, these adjacent buffering places that were not in the wilderness are critical to keeping them what they are for us today, you know, and these are very important for people for all kinds of things, whether it's hunting, fishing, hiking, birding, and of course, water too. So that's my quickie. Is that good?
thank you so much, Marina.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, Len, I think we're back to you. So, and actually, just before we kick it back to Len, thank you all for sharing some of your special places. And just so that the whole audience knows, I mean, we're spending so much time on highlighting places because it'll become obvious in a few minutes that it's really important to make these places like these are personal to us as Broads and as an organization, as individuals. They're not just anonymous places. And that's going to be really important when we write comments and weigh in with our legislators. And so I wanted to give you examples of places that people here on the call really care about. And so you can think about those for yourself too. Okay, Len, back to you.
Okay, so I wanted to put the current threat that we're facing in a larger context, which, you know, I'm talking to great old Broads. Most of you probably know what, you know, are familiar with these, but there are a number of interlocking bad narratives coming from, I would say, decision makers in DC, the current administration. So there's the, sort of fraud and waste. We have to cut fraud and waste in the federal government, which is leading to budget and staffing cuts for our land management agencies. There's the people have maybe heard the public lands balance sheet approach. The Secretary of Interior talked about the balance, but balance sheet. So, looking at our public lands and thinking, well, how much profit can we make from these places? There's an international competition narrative. So the idea that we need to be outproducing other nations when it comes to timber or critical minerals, that also gets rolled into a national security narrative sometimes. Then there's just the anti-regulatory narrative. So if it's a federal regulation, it must be bad. Who is the federal government to be telling us what what to do? And then an anti-federal land narrative, which is I think more prevalent in the West, and is the that isn't new. There's been for decades, folks who don't think that the federal government should be managing so much of the land in Western states. So those are not all new, but I think they're getting more airtime and kind of an interlocking in ways that that create difficulty for us. There's some very good narratives or frames for us. So one is the public lands and public hands, which has really become prominent since the happy conclusion for us of the attempt to sell off public lands in the budget reconciliation bill, where we saw people from across the political spectrum basically say it's public land, it's ours. So we think that helps us. Special places, especially local special places. So the more that people are defending their place where they've been and where they like to go and where their kids go. Wildlife is protecting wildlife is something that is popular across the political spectrum. Different polls show different things, but it's always, more than half of the people polled think that we should be protecting wildlife. And then clean water, especially local clean water, we think are very helpful for us. So those are, and the reason I wanted to, to sort of start with this, and this is a little bit more about narrative and framing, but is just these are the conversations that are happening in our country right now. So then the next slide, I just want to run through policies, and this is by no means a comprehensive list of all of the shenanigans that are coming down from DC, but as I think folks probably know, Senator Mike Lee from Utah tried multiple times to get various iterations of language to mandate sell-off of public land into the budget bill. That was actually ultimately defeated, although he said he's not done. We should believe him. Staffing cuts and firings, which have been, huge and ongoing, budget cuts, which have been proposed, and Congress is back now to work through appropriations, and then proposing or considering opening up national monuments and other places for development. And then we've got some forest-specific policies. So there have been executive orders and then a secretarial order around timber. Those have been issued, and the sort of quick story is we need to produce more timber in the United States. The One Big Beautiful Bill sets specific timber targets. So, and timber targets are basically, that's the goal for how many board feet. So how many boards our federal forests and national forests are going to produce. So the One Big Beautiful Bill increases those for both Bureau of Land Management forests, of which there are a lot in Oregon, and national forests. So that has passed. And the one thing I'll note about that is that it sets these timber targets, but there don't seem to be consequences if they don't hit them. So, that's, it doesn't mean that they won't try, but that's just an interesting note. The Roadless Rule rescission, which is in process, and So quickly, why are we having this webinar, which is that the Roadless Rule, which I gave the background on, and then we discussed, the administration is currently in the process of rolling back, or as they say, rescinding or a rescission. And so on Friday of last week, they published a notice of intent to roll back the Roadless Rule in the Federal Register. And then Chandra is going to tell us more about what we need to do in the next slightly less than 21 days. And then the final thing that I wanted to flag is the Fix Our Forests Act, which is currently under consideration by Congress and would basically make it easier for timber companies to do larger logging projects with less oversight. And if you combine the goal of increasing timber targets with the goal of the Fix Our Forests Act to make it easier to log, and then you open up all of the roadless areas for logging, you get a bonanza for logging companies. And then we think also mining in probably less, well, I shouldn't say that, mining in Alaska, a lot of logging in the Pacific Northwest, logging in Alaska, and then we see mining as a big threat in the Southwest, Intermountain West, and Upper Midwest forests, where a lot of the national forests are sitting on copper and uranium and other things. So it's the Roadless Rule is kind of the thing that we're really building momentum around right now. But I think it's important to understand that it's in this context of I think I've said, it's a puzzle piece of part of a really ugly puzzle that the administration is working to put together, and our job is to stop them from putting it together. So I'm going to kick it over to Chandra to talk a little bit more about the specifics.
Yeah, and I should note, if folks aren't familiar with Len and Environment America are part of the leader, and like really the leaders in a national coalition pushing back on all of these things and organizing organizations and individuals across the country. So there is a huge nationwide effort to collectively work, against these threats to our public lands. And so we're a part of that. So yeah, just to reiterate, with this Roadless Rule rescission process, what will happen is that 48.5, so I think if you remember the number, 58.5 million acres were covered by the Roadless Rule. But because Colorado and Idaho created their own rules, this Roadless Rule rescission applies to 48.5 million acres of land that would be unprotected, essentially. And then moving forward, managed under each national forest management plan, as well as all these other policies and laws. So as Len just said, coupled with, ongoing forest plan revisions and all of these other, mandates, we could see more roads, all the related impacts, more logging and mining, risks to all of these important values that we understand about these roadless areas and our public forests. But I'm not going to dwell on that because I think we've bummed you out enough after thinking about these amazing places. Let's talk about what we can do about it. So with the notice of intent to rescind the Roadless Rule comes a 21-day public comment period. It pales in comparison in how the Roadless Rule was put in place with lots of public input over many, many months. The Trump administration is fast tracking this. And so we have until September 19th to weigh in as the public. And beyond that, they will, move forward with probably a very rudimentary analysis and possibly another public comment period in the spring. But because they're changing rules around NEPA, which many of you know about, we might not have that opportunity to comment. So it's important that we do so now. And while we don't think they're going to actually listen to us, it's still important to load the record and show that the public really supports the Roadless Rule and these areas protection. So it does matter that we all produce public comments and weigh in. Probably a lot of you are on multiple groups, email lists that have petitions, or they're collecting, comments, and feel free to sign those, to do the forms. That's totally fine. You can submit more than one comment, but you should also do an individualized comment, and be as specific and clear as possible about the fact that you want to see the roadless rule remain in place and that these places are special to you. We will be sending this out with, you'll get an alert from Broads on where exactly to send comments. I have it up here on the slide now through regulations.gov. You can also mail postcards or letters or a huge packet of materials, whatever, to Washington, D.C., but they prefer getting things electronically, not the hard copy stuff that Len worked on collecting back in 2001. And remember that you don't have to be an expert. We're all talking about our passion for these places and the values that we place on these public lands, and that is good enough. You are a member of the public and who values these lands, and you don't have to be a scientist or have worked for the Forest Service to put together a good comment. So we will be providing tools, over email to help you do that as this moves forward. Just a note on it, again, I'm making it personal. That's why we spent so much time talking about specific places. Have you been to a roadless area? Do you go hiking with your broadband? Talk about those places, name them, use those interactive maps to find the places and include information about them, what you like to do there. Put a picture in your comments, and then there's also, and this will go out in a link, but the National Roadless Defense Coalition is collecting stories that they're going to use in various ways. So there's ways of bringing your special place into this, and you should. In addition to writing comments, through the public comment period on the roadless rule, you should also copy your legislators, send them the same message that you send the Forest Service. You want to see the roadless rule remain intact. You value these places, and at the same time, tell them to support the Roadless Area Conservation Act. This is a bill in Congress that's been sponsored by Representative Salinas from Oregon, and a number of what I'm familiar with in the Pacific Northwest, a number of senators and representatives have signed on. It would basically make the roadless rule a law, so that the same protections remain in place. And so, urging your legislators to support that bill, and just letting them know how much you value roadless areas and how they should be pushing back against this Trump effort is also really valuable. And then finally, spreading awareness about this. I mean, we haven't had to worry about roadless areas and development in them for 25 years. And so a lot of people don't even know about them. They don't show up on maps the same way that wilderness areas do, for example. And so making sure that in this very short time period of public comments, making sure that the general public is getting more information about it is also a way that we can help. So, Marina, I'm going to let you speak for a second again about submitting letters to the editor and how valuable that can be. But also I'll just say that, posting or sharing on social media about the roadless rule, tagging your legislators is another way. If you do Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, feel free to put it out there so that people just know that this is happening. And yeah, another great way is to submit a letter to the editor to your local media outlet. And Marina had a great letter published in the Oregonian. And so I just wanted you to say a few words about what that experience is like and what you included in your letter.
Thanks, Chandra. Yes. So actually, I credit the Oregon League of Conservation Voters for putting out that challenge to submit a roadless area letter to the editor, but it's something that I do pretty often, and op-eds are good too for longer ones. But just quickly, when I submitted my comment on my letter to the editor, I did do simultaneous submissions. That's fine. To several papers, and only one took it up, and the fortunately part, it was good news because it was the Oregonian, which is a great visibility. And so it appears in their Sunday hard copy issue. It was actually kind of an interesting, quick experience to tell you. I got called by a contract editor who was like, oh, I want to put all the links in for the online version, and it keeps going to your blog. I'm a writer. And so it was like she's linking all these things to Oregon Wild things and stuff. So it was actually a nice experience to see that happen. And what I would suggest in your letters is a lot, normally it's only about 200 and some words, 200, 225, so pretty brief. But in that time, it's like include a favorite place you love, why it's important, and also, if you can name drop some of your legislators in there, that's how they are always searching, and it'll go and it'll be looked at. So, I did thank Andrea Salinas in that letter, and I urged my Congresswoman Janelle Bynum to, be more actively supporting and sponsoring it. So that's another place, a way you can do that. And yeah, so I think it's a chance to name these places, to show how beloved they are, and also your personal concern about what would happen if we lost them. So I think that covers it.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
It's good when someone has a positive experience, gets published, and feels good about it. All right. Well, I think I know we've gone over a little bit on time, but we're recording this, so if, hopefully people who had to leave can watch later. But Julie, if there's questions that you want to moderate,
There's two in the chat if you and Len have time. Is that okay? Okay. So one is from Anne. Isn't there also a risk that if this rule is removed, another similar rule cannot ever be regained?
I'm not aware of that. I think well, yeah, I'm not aware of that. It would be the case that if something is removed under the Congressional Review Act, which has to happen very quickly within it being promulgated, that can do it. But this is, they roll back this rule, we can, a future administration can do another one, as far as I know. Of course, our hope is we just stop them from rolling this back, but that's not a risk that I'm aware of. But I will say again, I'm not a lawyer.
I think that concern comes from the Congressional Review Act, but yeah, that doesn't apply here.
Okay, and thank you. And so then we have Elizabeth. Does anyone know the status of the Fix Our Forest Act? Has it already passed the House with bipartisan support? Next, Senate, ?
Yes, it's in the Senate. It's a couple different committees have talked about it, and I'm not aware of a vote scheduled yet. So we still have time to yell at our senators. Or,
and this might be, oh yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say, or nicely.
And then this is a detailed question, but what is the cost per mile of road construction? I don't know if we'd have to look into that one, unless you all have a good response for that.
I have to look into that one, but it's not cheap, and then maintenance is also expensive. And I think Len or someone mentioned the backlog of road maintenance costs that the federal government is not taking care of, nor honestly should they. I mean, we've overbuilt our road system, and it makes sense that we shouldn't maintain all of them. But building new ones is definitely a cost, and then it's an ongoing cost into the future.
And this has been brought up in a couple comments, so I'll just bring it up here. The risk of fire is highest along roads, or people have talked about fire in regards to roadless areas, and shouldn't this be a part of our argument to keep roadless areas?
Yes. Human caused ignition is much more likely in near roads. So more roads will probably lead to more human caused fires.
Yeah, and that's, Len, you mentioned that earlier, and it's in like the talking points in the toolkits that will be sent out as well.
Just a quick jumping in on that. I just learned something recently that's scientifically true, is that the roads themselves are often making the areas more at risk of burning, because on wet slopes particularly, subsurface water would be just filtering across and keeping a much lusher landscape, and then but you put a road across it and it's channeling and dumping water away, and it's drying out those forests and landscapes. So that's another interesting aspect of why roadless areas are the most resilient to wildfire.
Great point.
And I want to respect everyone's time. I thank you all so much for being here. And I'm going to leave it to Len and Chandra to say any last words, but we will be Broads is going to send out an action alert that will also include this recording. And Len and Chandra, do you have any final words?
No, just thank you all for everything you've done so far and everything that you're going to do to educate people and get them mobilized around this. We need everybody to be involved.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, there's, you know, in addition to your individual comments, Great Broads, again, as part of this national coalition, will be also writing comments from the organization, so that we have all this clout. And for those in Oregon, and I'm not sure if there's these happening elsewhere, on September 9th in Bend, there's a in-person comment writing workshop at Worthy Brewing. That evening in Eugene, we're having one in association with other groups, also on September 9th. And then in Corvallis, Broads is hosting one on September 17th. So if any of your broadbands out there want to plan something similar where people can get together, and you could even, you know, view this webinar or some of the slides and write comments together, it's a great idea. We could be social, have a little fun, and do our part in keeping the roadless rule intact. So hopefully this will help with that. And yeah, thanks, Julie, for running the program here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Len.
And thanks, Marina and Suzanne and Lauren, for speaking up too, Mickey. All right.